Hi, my name is Dan Marek. I'm the Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development for Ruby. Today we're going to be doing our Ask Me Anything hours where you can ask me any questions around cooking. My expertise is actually in plant-based cooking, so we try to keep it a little around those perspectives, but I can go outside of those lines a little bit if we need to as well. I have a background in cooking whole food plant-based cooking for over 15 years professionally. I've been plant-based myself for about 24 years. I'm here to answer any kinds of questions you have around any cooking questions. Just a little bit of house cleaning before we get started. On this platform, you'll see on the top right hand of your screen, there's a little box that says Add Question Here. You can type in a question that you have and just hit the add button, and that will go to our staff to be moderated. And then it'll show up on the side with all the other questions in the queue. Now, if you see a question on that side queue that you like, you can always hit the heart icon next to it, and it'll move it further up in the queue. That'll make sure that I actually get to those questions in a quick and orderly manner. We don't have a lot of questions today, so I'm sure I'll probably be able to get to each one of them today as well, too. And we're going to start out with Shelley's question. We follow a whole food plant-based no oil protocol. How do I roast garlic without oil? Will it caramelize without oil? I roasted garlic in foil for about 15 minutes in my toaster oven. It was cooked, but it wasn't caramelized. Thank you for your help. Well, Shelley, it's actually, you started just perfectly here. The problem was you didn't go long enough. So to get that caramelization with no oil, you do want to do exactly what you're doing. You want to cut off the top of the garlic so you have the exposed pieces. And then you want to wrap it in tin foil or aluminum foil. And then you want to make the cutoff part facing upward and put it into your oven for about 45 minutes, to tell you the truth, at about 400 degrees. That'll actually get you that caramelization that you're looking for. It does happen a lot quicker and easier using oil, but it just takes a little bit longer when you're not using the oil to get the caramelization. At the end of that 45 minutes, you can definitely check it out. And it's a lot easier when you're not using oil because it doesn't spill out all over the place, the oil that is. Um, and you can check for that caramelization on the top. If it didn't caramelize all the way, try another 15 minutes and it actually should work pretty well. You'll get a nice brownness on the top of that. And they should just squeeze right out, just like the oil method. So I hope that works. It's a great, a great ingredient that I use in a lot of different dishes and purees. So I hope that helps you out, Shelley. All right, Teresa. Thanks for offering this event. Would you please talk a little about cutting boards? What materials are best for them to be made of and care cleaning for food safety? Any other recommendations regarding what to look for when I buy one? Thanks. So yeah, I actually, use a variety of different kinds of cutting boards. I use wood cutting boards and plastic cutting boards. Now, I kind of use them for different uses as well. Like for, anything that I'm going to be doing in front of people, or if I'm going to be, plating something on a cutting board, I'm typically always going to use a wooden cutting board. Something that just looks really nice, having that nice wooden cutting board. Now, if you don't mention here if you do eat meats or not, but if you do, I typically would stay closer to the plastic cutting boards just because they're much easier to clean and be able to get any contaminants out of it that you might. So if you're cooking something like chicken, having raw chicken on a cutting board, you definitely don't want to have something like that on a wooden cutting board. You always want to be using a plastic cutting board. The same goes for most animal products. If you're using any kind of animal products, typically use those on a plastic cutting board versus a wooden one. Now, wooden cutting boards are, they're great, but they also tend to, get scraped up a little bit easier than the plastic ones. And no matter what, once you start getting kind of grooves in your plastic or your wooden cutting boards, it's definitely time to replace those. So keep that in mind just for contamination wise. If you're It's something that could, as far as any kind of food safety, if you have any concerns about that, use the plastic ones. If you're just going 100% plant-based, wooden ones are actually quite nice. I typically use mostly wooden cutting boards myself, but on occasion we'll bring up plastic ones just because they're super easy to clean as well. And a lot of times you can put those ones in the dishwasher, where a wooden one you can't because it would actually start to fall apart. On cleaning those, again, just hot soapy water is great for both of them. You don't want it to be too hot for the wooden ones because you don't want the glue or binding to be able to melt on those too. I hope that helps, Teresa. I don't have a specific brand to be able to give you, but just look for high-rated reviews. Or if you're looking for a wooden one, I always like to go to the maker themselves to be able to buy one. All right. Our next question is from Cherie. I really struggle with meal planning, particularly for plant-based meals. Do you have any guidance, suggestions for getting better at this? I mostly get overwhelmed. So, Cherie, that's actually a great question. I actually just helped design two meal planning classes. One of them for Forks Over Knives. We have a meal planning class that's a partner for that Forks Over Knives Ultimate class that's for sale just completely separately. And then we also have one for The Beat, which is their sister publication. That one is not focused on a whole food plant-based meal. It's just plant-based. So they do use oil and different things in that too. And that's more kind of like a diet guide as well. But I did do a live event a couple years ago here. So if you go into the live events, there's a little live events, icon on the top up here that you can go to when you're in your dashboard. And if you go to that and just type in my name, it's Dan and then Marek. You will see all my live events, and on one of those is a meal planning guide, and it's almost an hour long on how to do plant-based meal planning. So as a member of Ruby, you get access to all of our live events, and that would actually be a good place to be able to start. And I actually go through an entire week's worth of meals and explain why I'm doing everything. In fact, I cook everything through that event too, so you can see about how long it's taking to do everything. Biggest tips for being able to, meal plan is really start to plan ahead. Come up with some core recipes that you know you're really good at and start to cycle those into your weeks, and then buy everything ahead of time. So I usually do my prep days on a Sunday, and I'll prep all the ingredients so I have them ready in my fridge so I can get them out quick and easy during the week and do any meal in less than 10 minutes. Now, I usually try to repeat, ingredients in different meals. So I'm prepping ingredients just like you would find in a line at a restaurant, right? So when you go to any restaurant, they're able to make any meal that you order in less than 15 minutes because they've already got all the ingredients chopped up and sitting in containers in a line so they can just grab them out and be able to cook them quickly and easily. Now, if you do the same thing in your refrigerator, you're going to find that you save tons of time when it comes to cooking your meals. Now, part of this is planning ahead. So I do recommend using like an app like Notes or something like on the iPhone. They have another one on the Android that's very similar that you can actually put out all the different recipes that you want to do and then create shopping lists from those recipes too. So that's one of my best suggestions is go back to the live events, plan everything ahead, and then also take a look at the new meal planner courses we have. Some of the short courses that are actually quite affordable too. I hope that helps show you. Andrea, what technique do you follow for roasting Brussels sprouts without oil? What is your favorite way to serve them vegan? So for roasting them, I typically will just, either quarter them or halve them, and then put them, get a sheet pan out, and then toss them in a little vegetable broth or a vegetable stock, and then basically just toss them a little bit, season them how I want to, put it at 350 in the oven for about 30 to 45 minutes. And you just want to keep an eye on them once they start getting that brown caramelization on them. So that's probably the easiest way to be able to roast them. Now, if my favorite way to serve them is actually by sautéing them. So I do them in a wok and actually cook. I do an onion and red pepper dice and get those onions kind of caramelized and put in my red pepper and then put in quartered Brussels sprouts into that same dish. And when they start to stick a little bit, I actually deglaze with a little bit of white wine and then add a little bit of salt and a good amount of cracked pepper into it as well. Now, I'm just going to cook the Brussels just for about 3 to 4 minutes on high while I'm tossing them as well. And what happens is you start to steam those Brussels a little bit with the wine, but I'm going to let that wine just dissipate so it keeps the Maillard process happening. So it's actually going to stick to the pan a little bit Get a little brown on those Brussels sprouts. Then I'll deglaze with about 2 tablespoons of white wine and wait for that to disappear and repeat the process. That is my go-to Brussels sprout. It's super, fantastic flavor out of it as well too. Some people might want to add a little bit of mushroom to it, which is great, or use a mushroom stock instead of a wine too. Would be actually a great addition. So there's how you roast Brussels sprouts and my favorite way to serve them. All right. Our next question is from Roy. I have an air popcorn maker and a great seasoning recipe. As soon as I add the seasoning to the bowl, it falls to the bottom and does not stick to the popcorn. Are there any tricks to the seasoning to adhere besides cooking with oil? Yeah, Roy. I also ran into this problem years and years ago because trying to cook popcorn without oil, going to an air popper is definitely the easiest way to go. Now, what I do is I take a little spray bottle, a food safe spray bottle, and fill it with tamari. And you can also reduce the amount of sodium on this or the flavor tamari by also just having that with water. So half water, half tamari in your little tiny spray bottle. And then when you pour out your popcorn from your air fryer, just do a quick spray over the top, toss it, spray it again, and then put your seasoning on. And then the popcorn has something to stick to. It's also adding a little bit of sodium to it, but that's probably the best way that I've ever found to be able to make that happen, and you get the seasoning to be able to work. Now, again, because there is a sodium content for this, I typically will make different seasoning recipes using no salt at all, just to be able to get those. Now, you could just use a water mix as well too, but I just like the tamari flavor; just adds a little bit more to it. But you could probably just do the water as well. Just make sure you do a very light spray, and you're not just soaking the popcorn, because then the popcorn will just melt down on you. So just a fine mist of liquid through a spray bottle over the top works perfectly. Hope that helps, Roy, and happy eating on that. Teresa, what is the best way to cook and cube squash to add to various dishes without being mushy or hard? So this is actually, very similar to our roasting Brussels sprouts before. So what I typically do to cube the squash is basically to cut off both ends of it, and then I typically cut it right down the center, scoop everything out, and then cube it from there. So I'll actually cut off all the skin on the outside and then cut it into equal sized cubes. Now, once I do that, I'm going to toss it in a bowl with some sort of vegetable stock, any kind of seasoning you want, but I typically will just do it plain in a vegetable stock and then put it in a sheet pan in the oven at 350 degrees for about 40 minutes. But halfway through, I'm going to take a spatula in and scrape them off the bottom of the pan, because they will stick a little bit. But they'll get that caramelization on that end. So I usually use a metal spatula on a cookie sheet, just to scrape that, brown off the bottom with the actual cubes. And then I will flip each one of those cubes over and let it go for the extra 20 to 25 minutes. Now, that's a great way to be able to get a nice crisp cube of your butternut squash. And you can actually freeze those for later too if you want to use them in other dishes. But that's definitely one of my favorite ways to do butternut squash. In fact, when I'm doing butternut squash, which I make quite often, I'll usually do that method first to be able to get a more depth of flavor on the butternut squash soup too. But that's actually the best way I do it, and it holds really well if you flip them halfway to be able to make that happen. Hope that happened or works out for you, Teresa. All right, Lorraine. Greetings, Dan. Have you any ideas on coffee substitutes? I'm looking for a satisfying alternative. Thanks. So that really is a personal preference. There are a lot of different coffee substitutes that are out on the market now, and I've seen a lot of these, like mud ads and stuff like that, which I've never tried before myself, but they're typically like a mushroom, kind of substitution as well, like that. But there are some other things that you can do out there that have been out on the market for a while, and I'm trying to think of the brand of it. Let me find out real quick. But there are some that have been around for a long time. I think it is called Pero is one of those, and there's herbal coffees. There are a lot of different brands that are out there as well too. Now there are here's the other one, is chicory. So chicory root is the one that I've seen most often people use as a coffee replacer. Now, it's not going to taste exactly like coffee because the beans taste completely different, from coffee beans. But those would probably be some of my best alternatives. Now, if you're just getting rid of coffee because it's probably the high caffeine content of it. I actually switched off of coffee a long time ago by switching to tea. And at first, I switched to black tea and then started reducing the amount of tea bags I used, right? So I typically drink iced tea. And I used to use just the standard ratio for iced tea that you would do, and then I started reducing the amount of tea bags I used per the amount of water, right? So it would be, instead of like two big tea bags for a pitcher of water, I would use just one tea bag for a pitcher of water, and then keep that going down until I switched to a green tea. Now I've since then gone back to black tea. I'm actually drinking black tea right now, but I still do the same technique where I use more water to a single tea bag to be able to make it so it's less caffeinated at the same time. But if you're looking just for something to be able to transition out, the chicory coffee is definitely something. Chai tea would be something that would be nice too. But again, if you're looking for the substitute for caffeine, that does still have caffeine as well. So switching over to something like a green tea might be able to be your best route for that. I hope that helps, Lorraine. All right, Kathy. Hello. In one of our lessons, we made roasted onions and garlic butter. What exactly is the meaning of butter, and what is its origin? Thanks and happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, Kathy. So that's kind of a funny story. That's actually comes from Chad Sarno, who used to work for Ruby. He's a great friend of mine. Still talk to him all the time. And butter is basically because he grew up in Massachusetts, and he actually has the brand called Wicked Healthy as well, which is a phrase. Wicked is something that a lot of people in that part of the country use, and butter is just a play on words and how somebody from Massachusetts would say the word butter. And because it was not actual butter, he was looking for a replacement word, just like a lot of people use chicken, where they just, instead of the en, they put apostrophe n. So butter is actually just a play on words to be able to say it's something like butter. So kind of a funny story there that came from Chad and Derek Sarno. But that's basically their play on butter. So I hope that helps, Kathy. And happy Thanksgiving. It's this time of year is definitely different for a lot of plant-based eaters. I myself am going to go with family where they will have, a meat course, but I'm bringing a lot of the sides that are all vegan as well. I'm doing the mushroom Wellington that you can actually find in our live events as well. It's a classic dish that I do, which is a portobello mushroom. And it's stuffed around the outside with spinach and wild mushrooms with thyme, a little bit of garlic, and then wrap the entire thing in a puff pastry, a vegan puff pastry, and then bake it off for 45 minutes at 350. It's quite good. And I'll actually do an aquafaba egg wash on the top of it too. But if you're interested in that, again, just go to the live events and our dashboard, and you can look up just my name, and you'll find the holiday recipes in there too. It's pretty easy to find that recipe in there. And happy Thanksgiving. So Mitch, thank you, Chef Dan, for sharing your time and knowledge. I have a question about woks. Time to get a new one, and I'm looking at a 14-inch carbon steel, but trying to decide round or flat bottom for max heat on gas stove. I have a wok support. That's great. Any thoughts? Yeah, so I actually have both of these kinds, and I have to say that I really like the round bottom more. And quite honestly, though, it's probably a little bit about what style you're using. Now, the reason that they started putting flat bottoms on them is because most people don't have a support for the bottom. So if you have a support for the bottom, I would definitely say go for the round bottom. The flat supports are basically because a lot of people on stoves don't have them. And especially if you have an electric stove, you need a flat bottom for it to be able to sit, because the rounded bottom won't sit on a flat stove. So if you have a wok support, I would highly recommend going for the round support on the bottom. Just for even, heat on the bottom, it's going to work much better than the flat one. The flat one, it's just the only thing they're doing is extending down that arch just a little bit. So when you look typically in the top of the pan, you're going to see that it's still arched in the same way. It's not flat on the bottom, but if you flip it upside down, you'll see the bottom is flat. And that's typically to be able to sit either on an electric stove or on a stove that doesn't have that wok support like you're talking about. So if it were my money, I'd definitely go for the rounded bottom. And I hope that helps out. All right. Um, our next one here is from Tanya. Is it appropriate to use a garlic press when the recipe calls for minced? Similarly for ginger, what's the difference between mincing and grating in terms of outcome? So let's see. Garlic press. Well, let's start with mincing. So mincing for garlic is typically what I would do. Like you could use a garlic press. It's easy to be able to do, but it does come out texturally just a little bit different. But if you're, there's nothing wrong with using a garlic press. A lot of people talk down about garlic presses, and it's not a bad thing. The only thing is, it's minced. You're getting kind of like tiny little pieces of the garlic, and you get a bit of a bite out of it. Now, if you're pressing it, you're literally just pushing the cellular structure through these little tiny holes, which is kind of extruding it out, basically. So you're kind of mashing the garlic a little bit more, which is fine, just a very slight texture difference. Now, for ginger, the difference between mincing and grating is pretty big because what you're doing is kind of looking at that same thing. So grating is you're actually taking it along a grater, and they're actual ginger graters. And they're not the same as like a cheese grater or something like that. They're typically made out of ceramic, and they have little teeth that come up out of them, and they don't fall out the other side. It just collects on the top. So when you take the ginger across this top, it's basically kind of getting all the juice and all the fiber to be able to break apart through the grater like that. And then you can scrape off the top of the grater to be able to use that. Now, if you're mincing it, you're cutting it into small, little, tiny little pieces, like into little blocks. So again, you're going to get a little bit more pop and a little more bite out of that version versus doing a grating where the grating is to kind of combine the flavors into everything, where the mincing, you're going to get it separated out just a little bit more than you would from the mincing, or if you were doing something like the press as well. So I hope that helps. It's just a little bit of a technique difference between the two of them, but it can make a big impact on the mouthfeel and flavor as you're eating it. So one, you get little pops of those flavors, and the other one, it's more dispersed through the entire thing. All right. So, and just as a word on that too, so if you're making something like sauces, that's definitely something that would be better for doing grating, or if like using your garlic press, those would probably be better versions for sauces versus just putting it into a dish. Okay. So, Judith, how long should one keep seasonings or spices? That's a great question that not a lot of people really realize. The standard shelf life for dried seasonings or spices is about 1 year from the time you open it. So as soon as you take the seal off the top of the seasonings, I typically put a date on the bottom of the jar. I'll just take a Sharpie and write the date that I opened it. I just have to do the month typically that's on the bottom of it. That way I know I'll do like the month and the year on the bottom. And then, by the next year, I know I either have to use it up or get rid of it. So if it's something that you're not using a lot of, buy smaller jars of it. And if you are something, you use quite often, then you can use a bigger jar of it as well too. But typically 1 year is the shelf life for the maximum flavor for any dried seasonings or spices, just to get the maximum flavor out of them. Great question, Judith. All right, Muriel, what are your favorite shortcuts for whole food plant-based food prep? I cook whole food plant-based for one person, but don't really like to cook. But I like the health aspects and results. Any shortcuts would help. So as I alluded to earlier, I think that one of the best ways to be able to do that is by prepping ahead a little bit. So if you chop up all your ingredients on like the weekend before your week, you have everything kind of on hand to be able to cook really easy, especially when you're cooking for one. That can be life-changing. And planning out some meals that have similar ingredients, so a lot of meals might have onions in them or red peppers or something, so you can cut those things up ahead of time. Now, if you're looking to get something like cabbage, it's an ingredient. So, say if you're doing a stir fry, a lot of stores will sell you part of the cabbage instead of the whole thing. So, I know like at Whole Foods and like Sprouts and different places like that, if you actually go and ask one of the team members there, they'll actually help cut the quarter out of a uh, out of one of those, so you can just buy it. It's bought by weight, so you can buy a smaller piece of that too. So having things like that are great to be able to do. Just prepping ahead a little bit in your refrigerator is really going to help shorten the amount of time you're cooking each day too. So if you're not really big into cooking, having a shorter amount of time to cook can really help to be able to get you onto the things that you want to do. So definitely check out that live event I was talking about earlier. Just look at, I think it's a meal prep, and it's under the live events, and just type in my name and you'll find that one as well too. All right, Teresa, is plastic not hard on your knives for a cutting board? It is harder than wood typically, but it is not. A lot of people do like glass cutting boards, or some people even use granite cutting boards. Those are horrible on your knives. I don't recommend using those at all. But plastic is going to be a little bit harsher on your knife than wood. That's one of the reasons I like wood cutting boards a little bit more. So if it's just that, if you're just kind of deciding between those two, you don't have things you're worrying about the contamination, definitely would recommend going for the wooden one as well. All right. So, Dave, greetings from Madison. Oh, I'm in Madison, Wisconsin too. I'm just wondering if you made it to our Vegan Fest this year. If so, if I had a food vendor's booth, what plant based food would you offer and could be prepared quickly at an outdoor booth? I did go to Vegan Fest this year. It was fantastic. It was my first year here, just since I just moved here a couple of months ago. It was wonderful to see how many people turned out to it as well. I was shocked by it. One thing I was bummed about, though, is how long the waits were for the booths. In fact, we ended up not getting any food at the festival because we didn't want to have to wait an hour in the line with at that time a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Just it didn't work out for us, which is a bummer. So we actually went to one of the restaurants that the booths were there from. Now, if I was there and I was doing, I didn't actually have a booth there. I don't do catering. My catering business was in Austin. I didn't bring it with me here to Madison. So, but if I did have one to prepared quickly at an outdoor booth, it would probably be a little bit of, like I said before, having things that were prepared beforehand to be able to serve quickly is probably the best way to do that. Now, for to be able to prepare it quickly, it has to have the majority of it cooked. So there were some vendors out there that were doing like sandwiches. So let's say, I don't know, let's just say like a seitan, you know, sandwich or something like that. Let's just say a Reuben. Okay, I'll just say a Reuben sandwich as an example. So that's something that's pretty quick you could do. You could have your toasts, as a rolling rotisserie toaster kind of going. You could have your corned beef, which would probably be a seitan mix or something like that, and the hotel pans, keeping warm. And then you could have your sauerkraut and a different thing, and a big thing of your Thousand Island dressing, right? So having those ingredients all separated out, you have your cold batches, and you have rotating, as your toast comes through. Then all you have to do is worry about assembly. So if you had two people being able to assemble those pretty quickly to be able to make that happen, that would be something that would be pretty quick and easy to do. Now, that's just one example. Sandwiches are an easy thing to be able to do at those outdoor booths, but you could also do something kind of quickly, in a lot of other avenues. I saw that the dessert areas were the ones that were going quickest. And in fact, we did get a couple desserts from places. That's because they were already prepared, right? They're already sitting there and already done. So for a lot of those booths, if you can prepare things ahead of time, that's really the best thing to be able to do. So handheld things where you have to prepare them on site, much harder to do. But if you did something like a I don't know, something that where it's the entire meal's already prepped ahead of time, it'd be a much easier thing to be able to make it happen. And a lot of those things could be like sides. If you think of those things as just like it's already cooked, all you have to do is put it in a container and you're done and out the door and you're on to your next person. So if I did have a food vendor's booth, it would probably be something that would be something be able to quickly get out the door, to be able to make sure that we could serve as many people as possible. So, yeah, it would probably be something and it could be just something from like, and I don't know if it would be whole food plant based, at a festival kind of thing like that. It might be something handheld. It could be fried. It could be something, that would be just easy, all in one kind of container. Being from Texas, tacos are always an easy thing to do. So just having your ingredients, your tortillas ready, being able to throw all the ingredients in there as quickly as possible, and get people out the door with a good quality product. So the key is having everything prepped and having a walkthrough before you get to the festival. I've done a lot of catering events and a lot of festival kind of things, and the key is having really quality food that you can prepare quickly, easily, and not having people wait for a really long time for it. The maximum wait for something like that should be about 5 to 10 minutes on a line. Definitely not an hour or an hour and a half, but part of that's just practice. The longer that the vegan fest goes on, the more those vendors will get that practice at that. Now, I did go to the I think it was the Art Fest in Madison as well too, and that seemed to go a lot smoother. But it wasn't because the vegan fest. I think they got a lot more people than they thought they would. Where they were like, um, you know, I mean, even in Austin having like Veg Fest we had there, you'd get like a couple thousand people, and that's about what it was at this festival too. And I think that seemed like they were a little surprised to have that many people, because they were all waiting in lines, and the lines just went around the block, if you will, even though it was in the middle of the field. But yeah, it was a great festival. I can't wait to see it next year too, and maybe help participate in some way. I don't know if I'll do a food vendor there, but maybe a guest speaker or something like that. But definitely fun. I can't wait to explore more of the vegan Madison side, because what I've found has been really cool. It's been a great community and really fun to explore. So, greetings from Madison. Stay warm, Dave. All right, Kathy. For our next question regarding meal planning, I found a free app called Copy Me That, which keeps your recipes and also has a meal planning feature that includes the ability to make a shopping list. I found that this app has helped me tremendously. That's great. I've never heard of that app. Copy Me That, Kathy, but if it works for you, that's great. I think that the biggest thing, a lot of people get hung up on, is this is it this brand or is it that brand? And the main thing is it gets you out there cooking and executing the plan. That's perfect. Whatever it's doing that for you, that's what you should be using. So if Copy Me That is your tool, I'm glad it's working for you, Kathy. All right, Mitch, follow up on a wok question. Is it worthwhile to get a Chinese spatula versus a regular flat spatula? I love a Chinese spatula for wok cooking. I think that I only use it on my wok, but I use it every time I use my wok. A regular flat spatula is fine. Sometimes I'll use what they call like a fry spatula, which is like the slotted one, on it as well. But more often than not, I'm going to use my Chinese spatula. It's just made for the scooping out of that wok, so easy. So you can use one hand to be stirring it, and the other one can go up to be able to flip that food around. I love it. It's you're talking about a $5 to $10 investment. And I think that you'll find that you fall in love with it the first time you use it in your wok. So yeah, Mitch, I would definitely recommend when you buy your wok, get the Chinese spatula to be able to go along with that. Just the natural curvature of it, and it has kind of these like little sides that kind of come up on the outside of it to be able to help pick up all of the things and some of the juices and sauce that comes up. It's almost like in the meat world, a lot of people turn things and baste, like their steak or whatever with the juices, which we do in some other things in the plant-based world too. But that's kind of what that's doing with the spatula on that style, and I love the way it works. I can't say I use it in anything but the wok, but when I use the wok, I use it every time. All right, Joshua. This is Joshua. I wanted you to know what can be used in place of yeast seasoning for food if I try to avoid yeast. I wanted to know what can be used in place of yeast seasoning for food if I try to avoid yeast. So that really depends on the dish, Joshua. A lot of times people use, I'm guessing you're thinking nutritional yeast in vegan food, which is kind of something that people put into things to be able to have a that yeasty kind of flavor to be able to make it sound or make it kind of taste like cheese a little bit. And really what they're trying to do is get that little bit of ferment kind of flavor into it. So if you're looking to be able to replace something like that, it kind of depends on the dish. For something like an egg replacer, I might try something like black salt, which has kind of a sulfur kind of taste to it. But it really kind of depends on what you're making for it. If you're looking to be able to get that fermented flavor, it might just be a matter of fermenting something. Just doing a natural fermentant instead of a vinegar, so it's not as harsh of a flavor as a vinegar ferment would do. But sorry to not give you too much, but without knowing exactly what you're using the yeast seasoning for, it's hard to give you a replacement for it. Phyllis, is Culinary RX a short version of the Forks Over Knives course? Actually, no, it's not. They're two completely different things. The Forks Over Knives course there are a couple of them. They're specifically directed on no oil plant-based cooking, and they're talking about really looking at the lifestyle as a whole according to Forks Over Knives canon, and that's very close to what is developed in Culinary RX. Culinary RX was developed more for doctors to be able to prescribe um, uh, to people that have come to them and looking to be able to make a lifestyle change. They're very similar in the style, where Culinary RX does lean hard into whole food plant-based. It's not 100% no oil, but it's pretty close to it. And you're going to see a lot of the same things overlapping, but you are going to see more of a focus on information from doctors in Culinary RX and why you should be making the change. Whereas in Forks Over Knives, you're going to see a little bit of that, but more focus on the techniques in cooking than you would. It's just more of a focus on the cooking aspect of it. Or Culinary RX I don't want to say it's like a 50-50, but it definitely has a lot more emphasis on the health reasons and health issues to be able to look at a whole food plant-based diet. All right, so Patrick here is the one. Do you like to use tongs for serving pasta? And if so, do you have a brand or style I like? And I do like to use tongs for serving pasta. I don't have a specific brand that I like, but I typically, I'll typically use, like plastic or rubber ended ones, just to protect pans, kind of depending on what I'm doing with it. Totally one of those guys. When I serve pasta, I use a ladle and I'll put the pasta in the ladle and then twirl the tongs to be able to get that really nice kind of tight nest kind of a stack. So that works really well by using tongs. Some people use tweezers. I can't say that I really use tweezers when I'm cooking. Even if I'm plating something really nice, I might use them, but pretty rare that I do. But yeah, tongs, I mean, most of the tongs that I use just are metal tipped. I just get from restaurant supply stores. The ones that are like rubber tipped, they might be like OXO or something along those lines, but I don't really pay attention to those as much. As long as they're well rated and I know they can hold up to heat, that's pretty much what I'm going to go after. And things like that, I'm typically buying at a restaurant supply store because they're not really expensive and I know they last really well and they're going to hold up to high heat. So, but yeah, so as far as style though, but yeah, just kind of typically use an end on them that's either plastic or rubber, just to be able to not scratch up any pans if I'm using a nonstick or something like that. But yeah, hope that helps. All right, Cherie, when prepping onions and garlic ahead, what's the best way to store them? Is freezing okay? You totally can freeze them. The trick to that is you have to make sure that it freezes quickly. So, if you're prepping your onions and garlic, you also want to make sure that they're separated out a little bit. So you want to put them on a sheet pan and spread them out. And typically, if I'm going to freeze something like onions or garlic, I'm going to freeze the sheet pan first, put the onions on it, and then put the onions immediately in the freezer to make sure that they freeze as quickly as possible. Because then the sheet pan is frozen as well, so it freezes much, much faster than it would without those. And then after they're frozen, I'm going to scrape them and put them into like a airtight container. That way they're able to come apart really easy and they're all not just stuck in one, big form. It's not often that I do that, but that will work. As far as storing them, I'll typically, chop them up and put them into a small, glass container to be able to use. I don't really prep them too far in advance, at the most, maybe 2 days. If I'm going to just store them in the fridge. And it's pretty rare that I do that. Usually, if I'm doing that, it's for pretty big meals, like if I'm doing a big catering event or if I'm doing a holiday meal or something like that, I might, dice, a couple onions ahead of time so I can just throw them into different dishes really easily. I'll store them in that sealed glass container in the fridge because it will get pretty stinky in there too. But freezing them, yeah, that technique that I told you about putting them in a sheet pan works really well. I do like that because you can actually just grab them on a container in the freezer and just use them the same way you would in any other dish. In fact, I've done them caramelized at the same time too, where I'll freeze the caramelized onions too. All right. So Sheila, for the coffee substitution question, some brands that make drinks are great. This is wonderful. Thanks for this, Sheila. Are Dandy Blend, Cafix, Cafe Roma. I have heard of Cafe Roma before. Ticino and Paravo. I've found them in stores that specialize in health foods, Italian or Eastern European grocery stores. Thanks for that, Sheila. That's something I did not know, and I'm glad you helped with that because it's something out of my expertise a little bit. Mitch, hi chef. Any tips on oil-free wok cooking? So Mitch, it's okay that you've got a couple wok questions here. That's totally fantastic. Oil-free wok cooking. So as long as you have a well-seasoned pan, it's not really going to matter too much. The part of the thing is that oil is what's seasoning your pan. So if you are getting a brand new wok, you do want to season that pan. Now, the nice thing about this is there's just such a small amount of trace oil that's on it that's seasoning the pan because you're actually cleaning it out afterward, right? But the pan itself should be pretty non-stick if you're seasoning it correctly. So if you're doing that, you don't really need a whole lot of oil into it anyways. And you can actually just use things like, broths to be able to do it. So, just like we'll just use a stir fry as an example. If you're just starting out with your onions, you put your onions in first, get them to start cooking. If they start to stick a little bit, put in a couple tablespoons of any liquid you want. Vegetable broth being an easy one. I wouldn't start with your tamaris and stuff like that, but something that's kind of like a lighter flavor on those to be able to deglaze a little bit. And then you can add in your other ingredients like your ginger, and then go into your mushrooms and peppers, and then put your garlic in a little bit later to make sure it's not going to burn. Because if you're not using oil, the lack of fat is going to let it kind of crisp up quicker. So, just using, any kind of like a liquid to be able to help deglaze and keep an eye on it. Anything starts to stick right away, just deglaze to make that happen. And that, the Chinese spatula will help to be able to get that stuff off the bottom quickly too. And sorry for all the wok questions, which is totally okay, but I'm giving such valuable info. Here's another question. I don't mind using a little oil from time to time. Does wok cooking work more or less as well with or without oil? Or is little oil in the way go for max results? So, most wok cooking is done with oil, but it absolutely doesn't have to be there. I always tell people if you're going to use oil and use a little amount of it, because most people are just like pouring tons of oil into it. So what you can do is just put a little bit of oil on the bottom of your wok and then take a towel and wipe the outside, because then what you're doing is creating the nonstick surface. And unless it's an oil that you're looking to be able to get the flavor out of, which is not a whole lot of oils, right? Like sesame oil is one that gets a lot of flavor out of, but that's not a high heat oil. You're not going to cook with that, right? So most people cook with something like canola oil or avocado oil because it's high heat, but you're not really getting an avocado flavor out of that or the canola flavor out of that. You're doing it because there is no flavor to it. So I always say just use as little of it as you possibly can. So if you're going to use it, just wipe it down with a paper towel. Then you have your non-stick surface, and then you can cook in it. And if you really love the flavor of the oil, like the sesame oil, or so many people are like, I love the flavor of olive oil, and it's like, well, you're cooking most of the flavor out of it if you're cooking with it to begin. So add the oil to it at the end of the dish. If you really like the flavor of it, that's the way to be able to cook it that way. So I say the same thing with this. Like, make your nonstick surface if you can use just a little bit of oil. But if you don't want to use the oil, go ahead. Don't use it at all. And then if you do want just a little bit of the flavor, put the flavor of the oil on at the end of the dish, especially on those low heat oils, so you don't burn off the flavor. So yeah, just a little bit of coating, wipe it down with a towel, and then do your cooking. Or use the method with no oil that I talked about, using like a vegetable broth or a mushroom broth or something like that. The biggest part of wok cooking is to make sure that it's dry most of the time, and then at the end, you wanna add some of your liquid to add some of those flavors. So, just make sure you're not starting with, like, a soup or, at the beginning of the dish, because a lot of people do make that mistake where they add too much liquid, right away to the dishes, and then you're basically, doing like a soup style in your wok, which you don't wanna do. The wok is made to, move a lot, really high heat, really quick. Everything in the wok is done really, really quickly because it's all done at high heat. And then you add the liquids at the end to be able to kind of release everything off that pan and add a lot of flavor to it. Well, that was our last question. That was a pretty quick session today. And thank you for joining us. We do these Ask Me Anything hours quite often. And I'm glad that I was able to help you before this holiday season. We will have another one of these coming up soon, and we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.